They laughed as she walked down the aisle. They laughed at the man beside her, a man who scrubbed floors for a living, a man in a rented suit with hands full of hard skin. They called her the janitor's bride. They took pictures. They made jokes. They shared it online so the whole world could laugh too. But here is the thing they did not know. Those rough hands, those hands signed the checks that paid for their houses, their cars, their private jets, their whole shiny life. Every single one of them worked for him. They just did not know it yet. Watch what happens when the mask finally slips. If you love stories where the quiet ones win in the end, stay with me and do me one small favor. Tap that subscribe button because this story gets wild. Comment where you are listening from in the comment section. Elena Vance was 28 years old. She had grown up in a big white house with tall gates. Her family had money, a lot of money, the kind of money that has its own name on buildings. Her father was Richard Vance. He owned Vance Global Holdings, 41 floors of glass in the middle of the city. People bowed when he walked in a room. Elena had everything: dresses, cars, trips to Paris just to eat lunch. And on a bright Saturday in June, she stood in a small church with cheap flowers and chose to give it all away. She wore a simple white dress, not a designer one, just white and soft and hers. The man waiting for her at the front was named Samuel Cross. Samuel was 34. He was a tall black man with quiet eyes and shoulders that looked like they carried things for a living. Because they did. Samuel was the night janitor at Vance Tower, her father's building. He mopped the marble floors on the ground level. He emptied the trash cans on the top floor. He wore a blue jumpsuit with a small white patch on the chest that said Sam. The church was half empty. Elena's rich friends had come, but not to be happy for her. They came to watch. They sat in the back rows in their sunglasses and their perfume, and they whispered behind their hands. Is this real? Is this a joke? She actually did it. Camille Whitlock, Elena's best friend since they were 9, held up her phone and filmed the whole thing. She was smiling, but not a kind smile. Bradley Kingston sat 2 seats down. He used to be Elena's fiancé before she gave the ring back. His father owned half the docks in the city. He leaned over and said something, and the whole row laughed out loud. The laugh was so loud, the pastor stopped talking. Elena heard it. She was halfway down the aisle when it hit her. It felt like cold water on her back. She stopped walking. She could have run. She could have turned around and taken her old life back, and everyone would have said, "Oh good, she came to her senses." Instead, she looked up. Samuel was standing there at the front. He was not angry. He was not ashamed. He was just watching her with those calm, steady eyes, like a man watching the sun come up. He did not care about the laughing. And in that moment, Elena knew something she could not explain. She knew that this man had never once, not one single time, made her feel small. Nobody else in that room could say that. So she lifted her chin, and she kept walking. By the time she reached him, the laughing had turned into something worse. Silence. The mean kind. Samuel took her hand. "You sure?" he whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. They said their vows. And in the back of the church, Camille Whitlock typed a caption on her video. "The janitor's bride. Poor Elena." She posted it before the kiss was even over. By midnight, 2 million people had seen it. 3 days later, Elena was called home. Not invited, called. The Vance family house had a dining room with a table so long you had to shout to talk to the other end. There were paintings on the wall of dead relatives, who all looked angry about something. Richard Vance sat at the head. Elena's mother Diane sat to his right, holding her wineglass with two hands, like it might run away. Her older sister Vivian was there too, already looking pleased. Elena brought Samuel with her. That was her first mistake, and she knew it the second they walked in. "He can wait in the car," her father said. He did not look up from his plate. "He's my husband," Elena said. "He's staff," her father said. Samuel did not move. He did not shrink. He just stood behind Elena's chair, with his hands folded, patient as a wall. Dinner was served. Nobody gave Samuel a plate. They just left him standing there, and they started eating. Elena stood up. "If he doesn't eat, I don't eat. Sit down, Elena," her mother whispered. "No." Richard Vance put his fork down slowly. He was a man who used silence like a weapon. "Do you know what you have done?" he said. 28 years, private schools, riding lessons, a trust fund the size of a small country, and you threw it in the garbage for a man who cleans garbage. "He's kind," Elena said. "He's the kindest person I've ever met. Kind." Her father laughed. One dry sound. "Kind does not pay for anything, sweetheart. Kind is what poor people say when they have nothing else to offer." Vivian smiled into her napkin. "Here is what happens now," Richard said. "Your trust is frozen. Your cards are cancelled. Your name is off the company. Your apartment is company property. You have until Friday." Elena's stomach dropped, but her face stayed still. "You're punishing me for who I love." "I am teaching you," her father said, "what love is worth when the money stops." And then he did the thing Elena would remember for the rest of her life. He looked past her, at Samuel, and he pointed at a spot on the floor where a little wine had splashed. "While you're here," Richard Vance said, "clean that up." The room went dead quiet. Elena felt her whole body go hot. Her eyes filled up. But Samuel just nodded. He walked over. He knelt down. He took a cloth napkin off the table, and he wiped the floor until it shone. Then he stood up, folded the napkin neatly, set it down, and said in a low, calm voice, "There, all clean." He said it without one drop of anger. And for one strange second, Richard Vance looked uncomfortable, like he had thrown a stone into a lake and heard no splash. He covered it fast. "Get out, both of you." They left. In the car, Elena finally broke. She cried so hard she could not breathe. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Samuel pulled over. He turned to her and took her face in those big, rough hands. "Elena, listen to me." His voice was steady. "A man knelt on that floor tonight, but it wasn't me." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" He smiled a small smile and started the car again. "One day I'll tell you." They moved into a fourth-floor walk-up on the east side. 2 rooms. One window that did not close all the way. A radiator that banged at night, like someone was trapped inside it. Elena had never washed a dish in her life. She learned. She learned how to make rice. She learned how to hang clothes on a line by the window. She learned that you can be happy in a room the size of your old closet if the right person is in it. Samuel worked nights. He left at 9 in the evening and came home at 6 in the morning with tired eyes and cold hands. But he always brought her something. A flower he found. A little pastry from the bakery that opened early. Once, a plastic ring from a machine outside a laundromat, because he said her real one was too fancy for grocery shopping. She wore the plastic one more. Elena got a job at a small art gallery. It paid almost nothing. She loved it. And slowly, she noticed things. Little things. Strange things. like the fact that Samuel read books she could not understand. Big, thick ones about markets and money and countries she had never visited, like the fact that he never asked how much anything cost, but somehow the rent was always paid on time, like the night she woke up at 3 in the morning and heard him in the next room, speaking on the phone, speaking French, perfect, fast, easy French. She sat straight up in bed. "Sam?" The talking stopped instantly. He came back to bed a minute later and lay down like nothing had happened. "Who were you talking to?" "An old friend." "In French?" "He's French," Samuel said. And he fell asleep in about 9 seconds, the way only a man with a clear mind can. Elena lay awake for 2 hours. 6 months into the marriage, an invitation arrived. The Kingston Charity Gala, the biggest night of the year for the rich. Elena had not been invited, Camille had. But Camille sent Elena a message anyway. "Come, bring your hubby, lol. Everyone wants to meet him." Elena knew exactly what that meant. It meant come, so we can look at you. She almost said no. Then Samuel walked in with a paper bag of oranges and said, "What's wrong?" She showed him. He read it. He put an orange down on the table. "Do you want to go?" "No," she said. "Yes. I don't know. I don't want them to think I'm hiding." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then we go." "Sam, they're going to be cruel." "I know," he said. "You're not scared." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something odd. "Elena, I've been in rooms that would make that party look like a birthday for children." She laughed, because she thought he was joking. He did not laugh. _ The gala was in a hotel ballroom with gold walls and 11 chandeliers. Samuel wore his one suit. It was clean and pressed and about 6 years out of style. They walked in, and the room turned like a wave. The whispers started at the door and moved across the floor like a spill. Camille came flying over in a green dress. "You came! Oh my God, you actually came!" She hugged Elena while looking over her shoulder at everyone watching. "And this must be Sam. Sam, hi, I've heard so much." She shook his hand and then, very obviously, wiped her palm on a napkin. People saw, people laughed. Bradley Kingston came next, with 3 friends behind him, like a small army. "Sam, my man." He clapped Samuel on the shoulder hard. "Great to have you. How's the mop game? Still strong?" "Still strong," Samuel said. "That's what I like to hear." Bradley grinned at his friends. "You know, we should get you a job here. This place is filthy." Laughter. Elena grabbed Samuel's arm. "Let's go." "No," Samuel said quietly. "I'd like a drink first." He walked to the bar, calm as anything. For the next 2 hours, they made a sport of it. A man named Hutchins asked Samuel what he thought of the wine, and when Samuel said it was good, Hutchins said, "Of course you'd say that. It's the same grape they use for floor cleaner." A woman asked Elena, loud enough for the table, if she had to teach Samuel which fork to use. Someone spilled a glass on purpose and called out, "Sam, you're up." Through all of it, Samuel stood straight. He did not shout. He did not storm out. He just watched them. That was the strange part, and Elena was the only one who noticed it. He was not enduring them. He was studying them, like a man taking notes. At one point, an older gentleman from Switzerland came over and spoke to Samuel in German, as a joke, expecting nothing. Samuel answered him, in German. 6 full sentences. The Swiss man's face went white. "Where did you learn that?" he stammered. Samuel smiled. "Around." The Swiss man stared at him for the rest of the night. The worst part came at the end. Bradley stood up on the little stage where the band played and tapped a microphone. Everybody, everybody, Quick announcement. The room hushed. We have a very special guest tonight. A real working man. He held out a hand toward Samuel. Sam, come on up here. Don't, Elena whispered. Samuel squeezed her hand and walked up. Bradley put an arm around his shoulders. This guy right here, he said, cleans toilets at Vance Tower. The room roared. And he married a Vance. Bradley shouted over it. Ladies and gentlemen, the American dream. People were crying with laughter. Phones were up everywhere. Camille was filming from the front. Bradley leaned into the microphone. Sam, serious question. When you look at all this, he waved at the gold room, the chandeliers, the people. What do you feel? Samuel took the microphone. The room went quiet, waiting for him to embarrass himself. He looked out over the crowd, slowly, table by table, face by face, like he was memorizing them. Then he said, I feel like I'm looking at a house of cards, and I can feel the wind coming. Nobody laughed. For about 4 seconds, nobody made a sound at all. Then Bradley grabbed the mic back and shouted, Okay, drinks are open, and the band started, and everyone pretended it had not happened. But Elena saw it. She saw the way 3 older men at the back table stopped smiling. She saw the Swiss gentleman staring again, and she saw the way Samuel stepped down off that stage, not like a beaten man leaving a room, like a man who had just finished a job. That night, Camille posted the video. When your janitor husband tries to be deep, #Janitor's bride. It got 11 million views in 4 days. Strangers sent Elena messages telling her she was a fool. Some sent worse. She cried in the bathroom of the little apartment with the tap running so Samuel would not hear. He heard. He sat outside the door on the floor and waited for her. When she came out, her eyes red and swollen, he said one sentence. 6 months, he said. Give me 6 more months, and I promise you will never cry over these people again. After that night, Elena started paying attention. Really paying attention, and once she started, she could not stop seeing it. Clue 1. The phone. Samuel had a cheap phone he used for normal things, but there was another one, a small black one, thicker than it should be, that he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket. One evening, she picked it up by accident, thinking it was hers. The screen lit up. It did not ask for a code. It asked for a fingerprint, a face scan, and a spoken passphrase. Elena had seen phones like that once, in her father's office. A visiting general had one. Night janitors do not carry phones like that. Clue 2. The car. Every Thursday morning, Samuel went out for 2 hours. He said he was helping a friend. One Thursday, Elena looked out the window. A black car was waiting at the corner. Not a taxi. Long, low, and clean, with tinted windows, and a driver who got out and opened the door for him. She watched Samuel step in like he had done it 10,000 times. Clue 3. The nightmare. He talked in his sleep sometimes. Numbers, mostly. But one night, he said very clearly, Tell Nakamura the Osaka position holds. We do not blink. Then he rolled over and slept like a baby. Elena lay there with her heart pounding. Clue 4. The news. That was the biggest one, because around that same time, the world started shaking. It began small. A bank in Frankfurt collapsed overnight. Nobody knew why. Then, a shipping company in Singapore. Then a huge property fund in Dallas. The news people were confused. They kept saying the same thing over and over. Someone is pulling money out. Enormous amounts of money. Coordinated, silent. And nobody can find out who. They gave the mystery buyer a nickname. They called it the Ghost. The Ghost had no face, no interviews, no photographs. Just a private equity firm called Atlas Meridian Partners that owned pieces of almost everything and never, ever spoke to the press. And every time the news said the name, Elena noticed something. Samuel would go completely still, not nervous still, listening still, like a man hearing his own name in another room. Winter came. The rich people stopped laughing. It happened slowly, then all at once, the way a bridge falls. Bradley Kingston's father lost the docks. A loan he thought was safe got called in without warning. He had 90 days to pay $400 million, and he did not have it. Camille Whitlock's family fashion label was bought out from under them. The new owner's name was a company which was owned by another company, which was owned by Atlas Meridian. Hutchins, the man who joked about floor cleaner, lost his hotels in one afternoon, and then it reached the biggest one, Vance Global Holdings. Elena found out from a newspaper on a bench. Her father's company had borrowed money to build a huge new development, $4.2 billion. He had been sure, completely sure, that the loan would be extended when it came due, because that is how it always worked with men like him. The loan was not extended. The lender wanted every dollar in 30 days, and the lender was Atlas Meridian Partners. Elena's phone rang that night, for the first time in almost a year. It was her mother, Elena. Diane Vance's voice was thin and shaking. "Elena, your father, he hasn't slept in 4 days. He's saying things I don't like. Mom, they're taking the house. Do you understand? The house." Elena closed her eyes. A part of her, a small mean part, felt like saying good, but a bigger part just felt tired and sad. "I'm sorry, Mom. You have to help us." Elena almost laughed. "With what? You took everything I had. I work in a gallery. I make $800 a week." There was a long silence. Then her mother said the ugliest thing she had ever said. "Then find someone who can. Surely that man of yours knows how to beg." Elena hung up. She stood in the little kitchen with the banging radiator, and she shook. And behind her, a voice said, "Was that your mother?" Samuel was standing in the doorway. He had come home early. He was still in his blue jumpsuit. The patch that said Sam, the mop bucket handle, still marked in red, across his palm. "They're losing everything," Elena said. "All of them. Every single one of them." "I know," said Samuel. Something in the way he said it made her turn around. "How do you know?" He did not answer. "Sam, how do you know?" He looked at her for a long, long moment, and then he said, "It's time I showed you something." They drove for 40 minutes, out of the city, into an old neighborhood full of brownstone houses with iron railings. Samuel stopped in front of one with a green door. "I told you I inherited a house from my aunt," he said. "Yes, I lied." He unlocked the door. Inside, it looked like a normal house. Dusty, quiet, a few old chairs, a kitchen nobody cooked in. He led her upstairs, down a hallway, to a closet full of winter coats. He pushed the coats aside. Behind them was a steel wall. Elena stared at it. "Sam." He put his palm flat against the metal. A thin blue line of light scanned down. There was a heavy sound, like a bank vault breathing out, and the wall opened. Elena walked into a room that should not have existed in that house. It was long and cool and lit with soft white light. One entire side was screens, dozens of them, numbers scrolling, maps with points of light, names of cities. Tokyo, Zurich, Lagos, São Paulo, London. There was a desk with 3 phones on it, all black, all the thick kind. There were shelves of files. There was a small safe standing open with documents inside stamped Atlas Meridian Partners, Office of the Chairman. Elena's legs stopped working properly. She had to sit down on the arm of a chair. "What is this?" she whispered. "What is this? What is this?" Samuel stood in the middle of the room, still in the blue jumpsuit. He looked completely at home. "It's mine," he said simply. "What's yours?" "All of it." She stared at the screens, the maps, the lights. "Atlas Meridian," she said. Her voice came out cracked. "The ghost, the one they can't find. That's me." The words sat in the room like thunder. "You're a janitor," Elena said, and she heard how stupid it sounded, even as she said it. "I mop floors 4 nights a week," Samuel agreed. "That part is true. Everything I told you about who I am as a man was true. I only lied about the size of the number." "How big is the number?" He was quiet. "Sam, how big is the number?" "Big enough," he said, "that the people who laughed at our wedding are currently borrowing money from me to survive the winter. All of them. Every family in that ballroom." Elena put her hands over her mouth. Then she saw the photograph. It was on the wall, in a plain wooden frame, in the middle of all that technology. The only picture in the room. A black woman in a blue jumpsuit, standing in the lobby of Vance Tower with a mop in her hand and a tired, beautiful smile. Elena stood up and walked to it. "Who is she?" Samuel's voice changed. It got softer and lower and older. "That's my mother," he said. "Ruth Cross. She cleaned that building for 22 years. Elena's heart went cold. "My father's building." "Your father's building," Samuel said. "She started when I was 6. She worked doubles so I could go to a good school. She never missed a shift, not one, in 22 years. He stepped up beside her and looked at the photograph. "And in 22 years, not one person on the executive floor ever learned her name. They called her the cleaning lady. When she said good morning, they walked past her like she was furniture." He paused. "One night in December, a man named Richard Vance had a dinner in the boardroom. Someone knocked over a tray. My mother came in to clean it. She was 51 and her knees were bad. She was slow." Elena felt sick. "He shouted at her," Samuel said, "in front of 11 people. He told her she was, and I remember the words exactly, too old and too stupid to be useful. He said if she couldn't move faster, she should go home and stay there." "Sam." "She went home and stayed there," Samuel said. 2 weeks later, she had a stroke. She died in April. I was 24. The room was very quiet. Somewhere, a screen updated with a soft click. "I was already good with money by then," he said. "Very good. I had built something small, and it was growing fast. When she died, I made 2 promises to her." He held up one finger. "One, that I would build something so big that no man on earth could ever speak to me the way he spoke to her." He held up a second finger. 2, that I would find out if there was a single person in that world, that shiny world she cleaned up after, who would treat a person in a blue jumpsuit like a human being. Elena's eyes were streaming now. She could not stop them. "So you took the job," she whispered. "You took a janitor's job in my father's building, on purpose." "For 3 years," Samuel said. "I bought the building's service contract through a company nobody could trace, and I put myself on the night shift. I wanted to see them when they thought nobody important was watching. "And what did you see?" He smiled, and it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. "I saw exactly what my mother saw." He turned to her. "Until one night, a woman came out of the elevator on the 32nd floor at 11 at night. She was carrying too many boxes, and she dropped them everywhere. And the janitor knelt down to help her pick them up." Elena remembered. Of course she remembered. "And she said thank you," Samuel said. And then she asked him his name. Not "excuse me," not "hey you." His name. His voice cracked, just slightly. "Nobody in that building had asked me my name in 18 months. Elena was crying so hard she had to hold on to the desk. "And then," Samuel said, "I found out something else about her. I found out that 9 years earlier, when she was 19 years old and home from college, she used to come to that building at night with bags of hot food for the cleaning crew. Because she thought nobody should work all night with nothing to eat." He reached into a drawer and took out a photograph. It was old and slightly bent. A young Elena, hair in a messy bun, handing a paper bag to a tired woman in a blue jumpsuit. Ruth Cross. "My mother kept this," Samuel said. "It was in her things when she died." On the back she wrote, "The girl who brought soup." Elena took the picture with shaking hands. "I looked for you for 6 years," Samuel said quietly. "I did not know your name. I only knew there was one kind person in that building, and I needed to believe she was real." Elena could not speak. "And when I finally found you," he said, "I had to know something. I had to know if you would still choose me when I had nothing. Because if I had walked up to you in a suit with a jet outside, I would never, ever have known." He took her hands. "You chose me when I was nothing, Elena. You chose me in front of a room full of people laughing at you. You did not blink." He let out a long breath. "So now it's my turn. Take a breath here. If you are still with me, comment where you're watching from, because what happens next is my favorite part of this whole story." Vance Tower. Boardroom, 41st floor. It was the coldest morning of the year. Around the long table sat the great families of the city. Richard Vance, at the head, grey-faced, thinner than Elena had ever seen him. Diane beside him, Vivian, the Kingstons, Bradley and his father, who had not shaved in a week. The Whitlocks, Camille in the corner, no makeup, chewing her thumbnail. Hutchins, 6 others, all of them the same, all of them ruined. They had come together for one last hope, because a message had arrived at all their offices at the same time, from Atlas Meridian Partners. The chairman will attend in person. 9 a.m. He will hear one offer. He will not hear 2. The chairman, the ghost. Nobody in the world had ever seen his face. "They say he's Swiss," Hutchins muttered. "They say he's a group of people, not one man," said Camille's father. "They say he's 80 years old and lives on a boat," said Bradley. Richard Vance said nothing. He was looking at the empty chair at the other end of the table. Elena was there too. Her mother had begged her to come. "Just come. Just be there. Maybe it looks better if the family is together." She sat quietly on the side, in a plain grey coat, and she said nothing to anyone. Bradley leaned over. "Where's Mopman? Late shift?" Elena looked at him. She did not answer. Something in her face made him sit back. At 8:58, the doors at the far end opened. 2 men in dark suits came in first. Not bodyguards exactly, something quieter and more serious than bodyguards. They took positions at the wall. Then a woman entered with a tablet and said, in a clear voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of Atlas Meridian Partners." Everyone stood up. Chairs scraped. and Samuel Cross walked into the room. He was not wearing a blue jumpsuit. He was wearing a suit the color of storm clouds, cut so perfectly it looked like it had been grown on him. A white shirt, no tie, a simple steel watch. He walked slowly. He was not in a hurry. He had never in his life been in a hurry. And he stopped at the head of the table, and he looked at every single face. The silence in that room was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard. Camille dropped her phone. It cracked on the floor. Nobody looked at it. Hutchins made a small sound, like a hiccup. Bradley Kingston went white, then red, then white again. His mouth opened and closed. That's the... He could not finish. "Say it," Samuel said calmly. Bradley could not. Richard Vance was staring like a man looking at a ghost, which was, in a way, exactly right. "You," he said. "You're the janitor." "I was your janitor for 3 years, Mr. Vance," Samuel said. "Night shift, floors 30 through 41. You walked past me 406 times." He set a thin folder on the table. "You never once said good morning." He sat down. Slowly, one by one, so did everyone else, like children. "Let's begin," Samuel said. "I'll be brief, because I know you have all had a difficult month." He opened the folder. "Kingston Shipping. Your loan is held by a fund in Delaware. That fund is owned by Atlas Meridian. It has been for 4 years. Bradley's father made a small noise. Whitlock Fashion Group. I purchased your debt 18 months ago through a Dutch holding company. I have been your landlord, your lender, and your largest shareholder since last spring." Camille started to cry. "Hutchins Hotels, 11 properties. I own the ground under 9 of them." Hutchins put his head in his hands. Samuel turned a page. "Vance Global Holdings. $4.2 billion. Due in 11 days. Richard Vance's hands were shaking on the table. He tried to hide them. "Mr. Cross," he said. And his voice was not the voice of a king anymore. It was small. "Mr. Cross, if we could just discuss terms." "We will," Samuel said, "in a moment. First I want to say something, and then I will never speak of it again." He looked around the table. "Every one of you," he said, "has spent your life measuring people by what they can do for you. You did it to my mother. You did it to me. You did it to my wife." The word wife went through the room like electricity. Heads turned, every single head, to the plain gray coat on the side of the room. Elena sat up straight. Camille whispered, "Oh my God." Bradley made a sound like he had been punched. "Yes," Samuel said. "The janitor's bride. He let that sit there. You put my wife on the internet, and 11 million people laughed at her. She cried in a bathroom with the tap running so I would not hear her. She was the only person in your entire world who ever treated my mother like a human being, and you made her the joke of the year." Nobody breathed. "Now," Samuel said, and he closed the folder. "Terms. What happened next? Elena would never forget. They begged. These people, these proud, gold-plated people, who had laughed until they cried at a man in a rented suit, begged. Hutchins begged first. He talked about his grandchildren. Camille's mother begged next, in a high, breaking voice, about the family name and 300 employees. Bradley Kingston, who had stood on a stage with a microphone and called Samuel the American Dream, stood up and said, Samuel, Mr. Cross, look, man, it was jokes. It was just jokes. You know how it is. Sit down, Bradley, Samuel said, not unkindly. Bradley sat down. And then Richard Vance stood up. The old man's chin was trembling. He gripped the edge of the table. I built this company from nothing, he said. 39 years. You built it, Samuel agreed. And people like my mother cleaned it every night so you could build it in a clean room. Both things are true. Richard closed his eyes. What do you want? He said. Just tell me what you want. Samuel stood. Here is what I want, he said. Listen carefully, because I will only say it once. He held up one finger. 1. Every one of your companies will be restructured under Atlas Meridian. You keep your jobs. You keep your homes. You keep your names on the doors. Your workers keep their pensions. All of them, fully funded, starting Monday. The room went very still. That was not what any of them had expected. 2. He held up another finger. You will not run them. I will appoint the boards. You will report. For the first time in your lives, you will answer to somebody. He paused. 3. He looked directly at Richard Vance. The night cleaning staff of every building you own will be brought in-house, given full benefits, health cover, and paid twice what you pay them now, effective immediately. And the lobby of this tower will carry a plaque with a name on it. His voice did not shake, but something in it went deep. Ruth Cross, 22 years of service. Richard Vance sat down very slowly. And 4, Samuel said. He turned and looked across the room, at Elena. 4 is not a condition. 4 is just a fact. For the last 6 years, Samuel said, Atlas Meridian has been quietly building the largest private charitable fund on Earth. $12 billion, growing, housing, clinics, schools, debt relief, clean water, work programs in 11 countries. He walked around the table. I have never announced it, because I did not want it to be about me, and I have never had someone I trusted to lead it. He stopped in front of Elena and held out his hand. She stood up. The whole room stared. Elena Vance Cross, Samuel said, loud enough for everyone, will run it. Every dollar, full authority. She reports to no one, including me. Elena's mouth fell open. Sam, you gave up $100 million for a man with a mop, he said quietly, just to her. You never asked me for a single thing. Not once, in a year and a half, he smiled. There is no one on this planet I would trust with money more than you. Elena laughed and cried at the same time. It came out as a strange hiccup sound. And in that golden glass room, in front of every person who had ever made her feel small, she put her hand in his. Diane Vance began to sob into a napkin. Vivian would not lift her head. Camille Whitlock said, so softly that only Elena heard it, Elena, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Elena looked at her. For 1 second, she felt every cruel word again. Then she said, I know. And that was all. Because you can forgive people without ever going back. The video Camille had posted got shared again, but this time with a different caption. This time, the whole internet was on Elena's side. This time, people watched that wedding footage and cried instead of laughing. She never let go of his hand, one comment said. Not once. Watch it again. She never let go. The plaque went up in the lobby of Vance Tower in the spring. Brass letters on white marble, right where everyone walking in has to see it. Ruth Cross, 22 years of service to this building. Say good morning to someone today. Richard Vance walks past it every day. He has never once been able to look at it for more than a second, but he does say good morning now, to everyone, every single person. It is a small thing. It is also, maybe, the only real thing he has left. Samuel and Elena did not move into a mansion. They bought the little brownstone with the green door and made it a real home. They kept the vault because he still has work to do. But they painted the kitchen yellow and they put a table in it. And here is the strangest part. Samuel still mops. Once a week, on Thursday nights, he takes the elevator to the top floor of Vance Tower with a bucket and a mop, and he cleans the executive floor himself. People have asked him why. He always says the same thing. Because the day I forget how it feels down here, I stop being worth anything up there. Here is what this story is really about. Anybody can be kind to a person who can help them. That is not kindness, that is business. Real character is what you do when there is nothing in it for you, when the person in front of you cannot pay you, cannot promote you, cannot get you invited anywhere. That is the test. And here is the frightening part. You are being tested all the time and you do not know it. Every waiter, every driver, every cleaner, every person in a uniform that makes people's eyes slide right past them. You do not know who anybody is. You do not know what they used to be, or what they are about to become, or what they carry home at night. The rich people in that ballroom were not punished because they were rich. They were punished because they used what they had as a weapon to make other people feel small so they could feel big. That never lasts. It never has. Money is a river. It moves. And when it moves away from you, the only thing left standing is how you treated people while you had it. Elena Vance walked down that aisle with nothing to gain and everything to lose. She did not know he was a billionaire. That is exactly why she deserved him. So be the person who says good morning to the cleaner. Be the person who learns the name. Be the person who brings the soup. Not because there might be a secret billionaire in the room. Because there might be a Ruth Cross in the room. And she is somebody's whole world. If this story moved you even a little bit, tap that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged for who you loved? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story. The end.